Alright guys, here's episode 2 of the Avant flip. Slight change in direction on the project. My brother decided he's going to want to buy the car off of me as kind of a family hauler, so I'm going to do him a service and put a little bit of extra effort on what kind of items I'm going to be replacing, which you can all see behind me. So I'm going to go through all of this spread of parts here and show you kind of what I've done to prep it and or what I'm replacing and why. This will probably cover nearly 90% of what goes wrong with a 1.8T AMB motor, and will really help you if you want to bulletproof your motor. A lot of guys say, can I just buy a 1.8 and have it be reliable? Well, if you do, you're going to want to probably do all of this and you won't have to worry about much of anything for a long time to come, for the motor at least. So let's dig in with it. We're going to start with the head over here and look at the rest. So we're going to start with the cylinder head. So this was a used unit that I received from SeanHuffmanParts.com by way of air freight. It came the next day when I asked for it. It was used, so I took the valve cover off. I cleaned up the entire surface. At the same time, I removed the rear timing chain tensioner here to replace the gasket that slips underneath it. I also did the half moon underneath the tensioner there as well. The way I went about it was I removed all the caps for the exhaust cam here, and this one across the front, I took that right off, and that gave me enough play to lift the cam out a bit, which then let me rotate this whole assembly out and slip the seal from underneath it. There's some dowels in there, so you have to get it pretty high up to clear the dowels, clean it up as best you can, then put it all back together. The proper way to do it is to have a tool that inserts down into a tube somewhere over here and holds the tensioner down. Anyways, I didn't have the tool. You also want to inspect the guide here. It looks fairly unworn. It must have been replaced once upon a time, so that I'm gonna leave in place. And then carrying on to the front, I also replaced the front cam seals. There's two of them. There's one behind this little sensor here. Fairly easy to replace. Once you have this crossbar off, they fall right out, and then you reinstall this crossbar and then just hammer the new seals in. I also resurfaced the block side of the head. The way I did it was, again, SeanHuffmanParts.com sent me this nylon wire brush wheel that I never knew existed. So it's nylon, it's super gentle on aluminum. There's three different courses. This is, I think, is a medium course. Anyways, you end up doing a pass on the block first or the head first, and then what I used for some really stubborn stuff was just a scraper. Being very delicate on the aluminum. You don't want to gouge the surface, the maiden surface at all, where your gasket goes. You'd be a little bit more aggressive with this on your cast block, but never on your head. You want to be very delicate on when you want to use this. And then you just clean it up with the nylon. And it does a really nice job of making the surface, or prepping the surface for it. And then next, what I wanted to do was delete the secondary air injection intake and pump and the whole assembly. So you can get these little block off plates from eBay. They come with their own little hardware, which looks to be really cheap. So anyways, I ended up reusing some hardware that I happened to find that was a lot shorter, because your secondary air injection pump hardware is pretty long and you won't be able to use it. So anyways, this whole combi valve is what they call it. You get to throw this out. Same with the whole pipe that leads to the front. This elbow is notorious for becoming rock hard, and whenever you try to remove it to do your valve cover or anything, it'll break, or it's just already broken. So anyways, by removing this whole system, you never have to worry about this again. You can literally just chuck it in the scrap pile with the rest of it. You get rid of all those hoses, your giant pump there. Yeah, that's nice little deletion to simplify the back of the motor. You will need to flash your ECU, so that way you don't get an engine code. I also replaced the rear coolant flange. The existing one wasn't leaking yet. They typically will eventually. This O-ring will distort and or this will crack and start just leaking coolant. This, I decided to go with an OEM coolant flange. There's some aftermarket options. I'd avoid those if I can. Spend the extra cash to get an OEM one. They last a long time, the OEM ones. There's an aluminum one if you want, but I think the OEM ones will last you at least 150,000 kilometers. So it'll outlast probably the service life of the entire vehicle. So go ahead, replace that while you're back here. You're going to want to torque everything, which is nice with the head off. You can torque everything to 10 Newton meters and make sure that everything's properly installed. Next, we have the oil cooler. Now, this wasn't necessarily leaking or problematic. I took it off primarily to do the gasket seal. If you're going to do anything with the oil cooler, at least do your gasket here. If you look hard enough, you'll find some cracks developing in the gasket. I decided to replace the entire thing because there was a nice kit that came with the coolant hoses, the cooler itself, the O-ring, and a new bolt. Not that you need it. And I kind of looked at the existing hoses, and they were kind of starting to get a little squishy and bloated too. You can see just how thick this one is in comparison to this, or even the other ones, how fat they are. So anyways, I figured I'd just chuck that in. Good peace of mind. And then here I've got the thermostat, and when I was taking the head off, I noticed that there's just a little bit of coolant here. I knew that was kind of an early sign of something starting to happen, so I took it off, and yeah, there was definitely a crack starting on the back side. So I figured, you know, no time is as better as now to replace it. And then that kind of spawned into, I should probably replace that hose too. Although it looks relatively okay, it probably didn't need it, but I figured I'd go ahead as well. And while you're doing the thermostat, even if you're not doing the thermostat, you might as well do the J plug. This thing gets usually pretty brittle too and breaks as you remove it. They make aluminum versions of these. Same story as the rear coolant flange there. You can get an aluminum version or just go with the OEM. I go with the OEM just because it's probably lasted 260,000 kilometers. It'll be good for another long time yet. And then we have here is the crankcase ventilation breather kind of elbow. It was starting to sweat around the oil cooler or the oil filter housing. You could see just that oil kind of mist starting, and just upon removing it, you can see this crack here, which is the early signs obviously of a failure, and the whole thing, what I've seen in the past, actually crumbles, and then you just have a great big old gaping hole from your motor, from your block going into your engine bay, and it starts to smell. But anyways, one thing to note is if you're getting a replacement, this I think is a URO, whatever, however you pronounce it, replacement. It didn't come with a clip, which is fine. You could reuse the old one, but it also doesn't come with this O-ring, which is kind of annoying. It would have been nice if it had the O-ring, so I don't have to run out and grab a new one. It's not detrimental to putting everything back together, but something to note. Here we have just an assortment of coolant hoses. I've got that looks like it's an upper, a lower. I think I went with the Hudson brand for the lower. I think this is just good use, low kilometer upper. And then I have the hard pipe to coolant flange. And this one takes probably the most abuse that I've seen on 1.8. You can just see how badly bloated that is and how tight it comes in around here. And this is starting to get pretty soft. This one I probably would replace at a minimum. The rest is all kind of subjective. This is the rear coolant flange to heater core supply, and this one, its common failure is if you're just doing the rear coolant flange on your cylinder head, that's the only thing you're in there for, you'll probably break this hose that connects to it. What happens is this O-ring that sits on the inside, I think it's, I'm not sure why it fails. I think it's just brittle plastic is root cause. You can see it's like, it barely even wants to go in. It is so distorted or so inflamed that it barely even wants to go in. And then as part of this connector, you have a plastic retainer that holds the O-ring in, and this connector is this plastic retainer supposed to be a part of the connector. And as you remove your coolant flange, it all comes out. You try to stuff it all back together, and it's just going to leak on you. So the new one, which is a Hudson brand, just an aftermarket one, has a nice metal retainer tab or ring that goes all the way around and holds that plastic piece in as well on top of the O-ring. So there's kind of like a added layer of protection there on this replacement unit. So just be careful if you're looking for an aftermarket one. Make sure you got one that kind of has that level of quality. It doesn't have a gear clamp here, which is nice, so it's a fairly permanent installation. You can cut this off, or you cut this off and replace just this connector, but honestly, if this was all in the car, that would be a bear to do. But anyways, replace the whole line, makes it life a whole lot easier. And back here, I guess this is just a diverter valve I'm going to be throwing in. PCV valve, it's always good to do. I've got my timing belt kit here, the water pump, tensioner, and just yeah. And then I've got the filter section. So just a new cabin air filter. And then I have a K&N filter that came with the car. Decided to recharge that, and then the fuel filter as well. And in the motor mount department, 2 hydraulically filled motor mounts. I think they're Phoebe, they're on sale, so they should bring back kind of a nice OEM feel to it. This is, I think, a Phoebe transmission mount as well, so nothing stiffer than what OEM is, and especially with this OEM snub mount. A lot of guys like to go to poly, but for this owner, I'm just gonna keep it simple and nice and cushy and smooth, and should be fine. I also have those injector cups that I'm gonna be installing. Some guys like to put RTV sealant around as they on the threads. I'm gonna try it without. I mean, removing the old didn't have any on it, so I'm just gonna install them as is. And then I've got the ECU carrier here, which I'm going to be sending out to get the coating flashed for the secondary air injection delete. The ECU is kind of retained with a chastity belt, if you will, for bolts though, and you can get these out by extracting them with just a bolt extractor, or you can cut a slot in the middle of it, then use a flathead to break them out. But they're pretty stubborn because they're Loctited in there with some blue Loctite. And that's pretty much it. That should cover kind of everything that I'm doing for the motor here. Overall, after this, it should be a fairly smooth running and headache-free 1.8.
That's it for this episode. We're going to get into installing all that gear in the following episode, so stay tuned for that.